Recently came out a 2-hour-long interview with Moscow's emperor, and I would like to fact-check the 30-bit historical part of it.
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds.
But before I jump in, let's measure temperature of our patience. On one hand, we're dealing with a dictator who chose to invade another sovereign nation for no justifiable reason. According to the UN, over 1,500 Ukrainian children were killed or injured as a result of this decision to invade. A decision Putin chooses to stand by until this very day. A decision that benefits no one on this planet. Just today, on 10th of February, Muscovits killed 7 people with their kamikaze drones, including 3 children, in an act of terrorism Ukrainians face on a daily basis. We are dealing with a dictator who got an arrest warrant from International Criminal Court for committing an act of genocide, mass kidnapping of Ukrainian children. We are dealing with an emperor of a neo-empire that is recognized by European Parliament as a state sponsor of terrorism. We are dealing with a pathological liar who's been involved in showing video game as a real combat footage, who constantly surrounds himself with actors imitating regular people, who is manipulating video footage to add his presence or head in the post-production, who lied so many times it's really impossible to count them all. Now on the other side we have Tucker Carlson, another pathological liar, master manipulator and Moscow sympathizer.
Why would we take Ukraine's side? Why wouldn't we on Russia's side?
He lied about Ukraine being not democracy, about Zelensky being dictator.
He is a dictator.
About Ukraine banning that branch of religion.
The Ukrainian government has now banned an entire Christian denomination.
He manipulated information on many occasions to his ignorant audience, for example, to make it sound like Ukraine is putting opposition in jail, while in reality, Ukraine was putting Moscow agents in jail. On top of it, Tucker Carlson falsely accused Ukraine into blowing up Kakhovka Dam.
And in fact, the Ukrainians did do that.
And with zero evidence blamed the active president of the United States of America for committing an act of international terrorism, blowing up Nord Stream pipelines. Millions of ignorant Americans believe him, including 2 of my friends, Bruce and Dave. Oh, and one more thing, another delusional buddy of his, Elon Musk, calls Tucker a journalist, which is a lie proven in court when Tucker was fired from Fox News. Anyway, my name is Yaroslav, I'm from Ukraine, welcome to my channel. Stay tuned until the very end to hear my opinion of the ramifications this interview possibly had. And now let's bust some Moscow historical myth.
Aggressive impulses of an evil empire.
When the Danzig people of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign.
Okay, so this Rurik figure that Putin is referring to, it is a legendary figure and it is not proven he ever existed. We have only one reference to him in chronicles that were written in 12th century but was mentioning events happening 5 centuries before that. And there are no other records of this Rurik existing. Imagine if today we would speak about Columbus existing from only one source that was written today. On this basis, it would be insane to claim Columbus really existed. There was another lie that Putin said about Varyaks. In the chronicles, it's listed that they lived by the sea, and we have good evidence to support it was by the Black Sea.
So Russia began to develop with 2 centers of power, Kyiv and Novgorod.
Okay, so Putin mentioned Novgorod twice here already. And the interesting part is that Novgorod has nothing to do with Moscow Empire. Novgorod existed as an independent nation called Novgorod Republic. And guess what happened to this republic? Muscovites, after a series of war, completely destroyed this nation, annexed their territories and assimilated Novgorodian ethnos into Muscovites, committing an act of ethnocide. Also, according to traditional Moscow values, they burned, pillaged, looted, deported people. If you are interested to learn more, look up Novgorod Massacre. So I hope this is clear. Novgorod has no relation to Moscow, and Novgorod had little to do with actual Rus. It was conquered by Rus and was paying tribute to them. People living in Novgorod never called themselves Rusyns. So let's continue.
But the fragmented Russian state became an easy prey to the empire created earlier by Genghis Khan. The southern part, including Kyiv, by the way, and some other cities simply lost independence, while northern cities preserved some of their sovereignty.
Of course, Putin is not going to mention the kingdom of Russia that also survived the Mongol invasion and preserved its independence for another 2 centuries. And also, let's not forget the elephant in the room, that Putin is referring to Moscow's origins as in Rus, which is a lie. I made a whole entire episode on how Moscow stole Russian identity, which to those who haven't viewed it, it's kind of similar how Germany stole the Roman Empire identity by calling itself Holy Roman Empire for a few centuries, the same way Moscovia did that to Rus. So check out my episode for all the juicy details. Anyway, let's keep watching.
It was even called the Lithuanian-Russian Duchy, because Russians were a significant part of this population.
He's saying Russian, but it is incorrectly. People living in Rus were called Rusyns, not Russians. Yeah.
Originally, the word Ukrainian meant that the person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service.
Putin is referencing the origin of the name Ukraine as some kind of borderland on the fringes, which is also another lie. Ukraine simply cannot mean borderland, as nobody would call themselves border people. That's just common sense, but I'll be making a dedicated episode about the origin of the name Ukraine.
And in 1654, even a bit earlier, so that you don't think that I'm inventing things, I'll give you these documents. Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the man who then controlled the power in this part of the Russian lands.
Putin is referencing 1654 Pereyaslav Agreement, and while we do know this agreement happened, we actually do not have the original text of it. So whatever Putin has in his folder is a fabricated lie. On top of it, Putin references Bogdan Khmelnytsky, and we have many records that Bogdan Khmelnytsky was considering himself the ruler of Ukrainian people. We have this proven in many documents that he signed, but of course Putin conveniently fails to mention that Ukrainian nation already exists. So later in the video, when Putin will be claiming that Ukrainian nation was created by Austro-Hungary or by Lenin,
but rather belonged to a special ethnic group, Ukrainians started being propagated by the Austrian General Staff,
it's a blatant lie. Alright, let's keep watching.
asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar.
Alright, he just said, under strong hand of Moscow Tsar. So a little bit slip of the tongue, because no Russia existed at that point.
And 32 years later, I think, a peace treaty with Poland, which they called Eternal Peace, was signed. These lands, the whole left bank of Dnieper, including Kyiv, went to Russia. And the whole right bank of Dnieper remained in Poland.
So it took 32 years until Moscow broke the agreement with Bogdan Khmelnytsky, until Moscow signed an agreement with Polish to divide Ukraine. The right bank would go to Poland and the left bank would go to Moscow state. So their tradition of breaking agreements dates back centuries. Well, I did say we don't know the context of the Pereyaslav agreement in 1654. We do have some understanding that Ukrainians asked for protection from Moscow Tsar. And what kind of protection is that if 32 years later they just divide Ukraine in half?
After World War I, this territory was transferred to Poland, and instead of Danzig, a city of Gdansk emerged.
Gdansk is originally a Polish city and it predates German occupation.
Poles had not given the Danzig corridor to Germany and went too far, pushing Hitler to start World War II by attacking them.
This is a very interesting part where Putin justifies Hitler, in a way making him sound like he was forced to invade Poland. He was forced to start concentration camps and so on, which is in a way what Moscow Empire is doing right now to Ukraine. They are claiming that they were forced to invade Ukraine, making themselves sound like a victim. By whitewashing Hitler, he tries to whitewash himself. I wonder, why is he trying to whitewash himself? Why not just come out and say, yeah, we're taking it by force, yeah, we don't want Ukraine to exist. Well, why is he trying to pretend like he's a good guy when he clearly is not? Maybe this is a play for internal audience? Because clearly Western audience, I think they're not idiots and they would see how justifying anything that Hitler did would not score you any points. Anyway, let's keep watching.
By the way, the USSR behaved very honestly. It asked Poland's permission to transit its troops through the Polish territory to help Japan.
Yes, USSR behaved really honestly and invaded Poland together with Hitler just 3 weeks later and had a joint Soviet-Nazi parade in Brest-Litovsk. For some reason, Putin forgets to mention that.
After the victory in the Great Patriotic War, as we call World War II.
You know why they call World War II Great Patriotic War? It's what Orwell would describe as Newspeak, because Muscovites are the one who started World War II in 1939 by invading Poland, so they just changed the name, Great Patriotic War.
In 1922, when the USSR was being established, the Bolsheviks started building the USSR and established the Soviet Ukraine, which had never existed before.
That's a lie. Ukraine existed before. First of all, it existed under the leadership of Bogdan Khmelnytsky that Putin referenced, and we see it on lots of maps. Ukraine is being referenced as Kraina, the land of Cossacks. And of course, Ukraine, there was Ukraine's People Republic with its own president, its own currency, its own laws, its own army. In fact, it was recognized by a bunch of other states in Europe.
Again, for some unknown reasons, he transferred to that newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine some of the lands together with people living there, even though those lands had never been called Ukraine.
So yeah, we see the Ukraine's People Republic map and we see the Ukrainian Soviet Republic, and Moscovia has grabbed a lot of historical Ukrainian lands to themselves. And actually recently Zelensky signed a document about lands in Russian Federation that are inhabited by Ukrainians and that were assimilated by them, which Muscovites are really good at making people forget who they are.
Those lands included the Black Sea region, which was received under Catherine the Great, and which had no historical connection with Ukraine whatsoever.
Yeah, that's also a lie. Most of the southern Ukraine was inhabited by Tatars, Crimean Tatars, and southern Ukraine had a lot of Ukrainian Cossack settlements. It's the opposite that is true. Moscow has no relation to southern regions of Ukraine.
You obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case for the first 22 years as president that Ukraine wasn't a real country?
I like the question that Tucker asks. In a way, it makes completely perfect sense. Why you waited for so long to do what's right? Well, it's because it's not right.
And for unknown reasons, again, the Bolsheviks were engaged in Ukrainization.
It's true, there was a short period of Ukrainization when Bolshevik power was at its weakest. They were afraid of any kind of uprisings, so they decided to minimize any threats to them. But claiming that Bolsheviks were somehow Ukraine-friendly is a blatant lie. They've instigated 3 hungers. Bolsheviks also organized the Red Terror on the territories of Ukraine, where they would wipe out the entire villages. Bolsheviks also organized executed Renaissance of Ukraine, where they would have executed Ukrainian scientists, writers, poets. Yeah, and of course Putin forgets to mention the genocide that Bolsheviks committed by murdering millions of Ukrainians in 1932. My grandma actually, she was born in 1932 and her bones of her legs are twisted like cricket like that, so she walks like a little baby because when she was an infant she had nothing to eat. And actually, if we look at the census of USSR and we look that in 1926 there were 31 million Ukrainians, but in 1939 there were 28, literally missing 3 million Ukrainians. While Belarusian population, it increased.
Affirmed that Ukraine is an artificial state that was shaped at Stalin's will.
Okay, and also follow the logic. Okay, Ukraine is artificial state, so let's murder them? While in Moscow Empire, over 20 million people have to go outside to get water and go to the bathroom. Poverty in the regions of Moscow Empire is insane. I have an episode about that, rediscovering the Russian Empire, so check them out to see the depth of delusion of this neo-emperor.
Moreover, I would like to share a very interesting story with you. I digress.
Did you see Tucker's look? He's like, oh god, please, no more history lessons.
And then went to Western Ukraine, and all the names of towns and villages they were in Russian and in Hungarian. This is their land, they live here. When now there is an infringement.
Well, yeah, Putin tries to nail down the argument that Ukraine is artificial state composed of the territories of other nations. But let's look at the ethnic map of Hungarians, and we see that Hungarians live on just a slimmer of this territory of Ukraine. There are much more Hungarians living in Romania and other countries. Bringing this as an argument is insane in its own.
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian leadership.
Of course, no Moscow leaders wanted the collapse of the USSR, but there was nothing they could have done to prevent it. USSR proved to be that it cannot exist. People had nothing to eat. At this point, it was a failed state, and...
In fact, a common language, more than 90% of the population there spoke Russian.
Yeah, this language, Moscow language, was imposed by force on many people. If you wanted to succeed in Soviet Union, you had to know their language. It's not just to say that language is a unifying factor. Alright, so that concludes the 30-second historical segment of 2-hour-long interview. I don't think it makes any sense to fact-check it any further. I think the ramification of this interview actually benefit the free world. So I think this video might drag out some percentage of those MAGA people to see how delusional Putin is, how soft Tucker goes on Putin. He didn't ask him any serious question. of why is Russia invading Ukraine and sacrificing its own resources for the worst instead of doing something good with them? We haven't seen any of those questions. This interview also showed us the cocoon Putin is living in. The cocoon, it becomes so apparent that he lives in this bubble where no feedback exists with the outside world. It's unknown if Putin even knows how to use internet, but it's apparent he's been marinating in his delusional ideas, and his ideas becoming even more delusional with each day. On top of that, we see how Putin acted softly, almost like a crybaby. Oh, we are forced, we are a victim here, we are innocent, blah blah blah. I was afraid he would act in a way that would play into nuclear blackmail, play into like, hey, we're gonna use nukes if you continue helping Ukraine. But this video was, in my opinion, pathetic, laughable, amusing, and it's probably the worst interview Moscow's Führer has ever given. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to check out my episode How Moscovia Stole Russian Identity and a bunch of other videos on my channel. And until the next video.
But if history teaches anything, it teaches that simple-minded appeasement or wishful thinking about our adversaries is folly. It means the betrayal of our past, the squandering of our freedom. So I urge you to speak out against those who would place the United States in a position of military and moral inferiority.
Savage Sage.